Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. CTAC is actually a virtual workshop. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And we can start with the agenda. As you can see, the agenda, we have 2 items on the agenda. We will be going over the rules of engagement, and I will ask everybody to, make sure to mute your microphones to make sure that you don't have any background noise or anything like that. If you do need to leave, or if you need to, exit the camera or walk around or something like that, please go ahead and just turn your camera off. And when you return, you can turn your camera back on. All right. Thank you so much. Let's go on to our rules of engagement. All right. So the rules of engagement. This is a workshop. It's being held virtually, and it is being recorded. So you will be able to see it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, TPO YouTube channel. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact Lisa Wan. Our number is 617-453-4269. So then that way we can have a technical member assist you if you have any technical issues. All attendees may remain muted. I just mentioned that, just please remain muted throughout the duration of this workshop. If you wish to provide a comment, please use a raise hand button. I or the chair or the vice chair will acknowledge you. Then you can turn your microphone back on and unmute yourself. Please proceed by first providing your full name, agency, represented or members, and then your comment. Your microphone will remain unmuted until the comment has been fully addressed. In compliance with all applicable rules and regulations, no actions or motions shall be permitted during this workshop. Discussions shall be limited to matters listed in the published workshop agenda. Permissible discussions include presentations, questions and answers, comments related to the presentations. Any committee member deviating from these guidelines will be reminded as to the limitations on such discussions. Please hold all comments until the presentations are concluded. All right, thank you. Those are the rules of engagements. And now we're going to jump right into our first presentation for the day. And that is the Northwest 36th Street Multimodal Corridor, Phase 3, Update Study by Daphne from the Florida Department of Transportation, District 6. Welcome, Daphne.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Daphne Spanos. I'm the consultant for the Florida Department of Transportation with the EXP US Services, and I'm the project manager on this study. And we're here to give you an update tonight. So we can go to the next slide. On the 36th Street Multimodal Study. On our team is Carlos Castro, the project manager. I'm not sure, I don't think he was able to make it tonight. I think he's out of town. Here I am again, and our community outreach specialist, Monica Diaz with ISC Group, and we have a very qualified team of sub-consultants. So this is our meeting agenda for tonight. We're gonna talk about the project location map, previous studies, a summary of what we've heard from you previously. We're going to go through the alternatives process and where we are up to today in the alternatives process and why we have looked at some of the concepts we have, as well as go over the next steps, the schedule, and then be able to answer any questions. So just to refresh everyone's memory, the Northwest 36th Street Multimodal Corridor Study, or State Road 948, starts from the Palmetto Expressway, State Road 826, and it goes all the way to State Road 5, US 1, and it's about 8.6 miles long. What we're showing here is segmentation of the corridor. We're calling the western segment from 826 to Lejeune, or Northwest 42nd Avenue, and the eastern segment from just east of Lejeune all the way to State Road 5, US 1. And the reason why we've segmented the corridor is because the corridor does change in nature and its characteristics from west to east. As you're in the west near the Miami International Airport, it's more industrial. Then you have the communities of Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs. The roadway is 6 lanes wide. Then we have this middle segment, the Iron Triangle, which is a parallel study that FDOT has recently wrapped up. And then in the east, the nature of the corridor starts to shift between 4 and 2 lanes. And then as you head further east, hitting Midtown, Miami and Wynwood, the nature of the corridor is more walkable, livable type of community. So the corridor does pass through very different characteristics. The Alapata Metro Rail Station and the Hialeah Tri-Rail Station are just off the corridor, as well as a lot of community features. Next, please. So there have been a numerous amount of previous studies done along 36th Street showing a great interest in this corridor, both from a local level and a state level. These are mapped here, and probably we didn't even capture all of the previous studies that have been done. But we start to see trends in these previous studies. A lot of them focus on optimizing the operations of the corridor, signal retiming, looking at connecting the highways 112 to 826. There's also freight studies relating to the corridor, as well as the county's long-range plan, the City of Miami master plan for the bicycle and pedestrian, as well as the I-195 study, again, a similar effort of FDOT. Next, please. So last time we met with you all, these were some of the highlighted points that we heard. One TPO member asked if the project was an elevated roadway and if there's a method to quantify whether this kind of analysis or this kind of recommendation improved the conditions. Another member stated that the improvement should go further west than the Palmetto Expressway. Another TPO member asked if State Road 112 would be extended and suggested extending over Perimeter Road instead of along Northwest 36th Street. And then there were some comments about keeping transit and bike lanes and support for mid-block crosswalks. We also held a numerous amount of public engagement activities, and we're continuing to hold them right now and will be in the next couple of months. And these are the main conclusions from those first round of public meetings. There were concerns from the cities, particularly Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs, about any sort of elevated section. There was input regarding bicycle pedestrian facilities, concern about impacts to businesses and residences, concerns about the project increasing freight traffic or bringing more traffic, especially freight traffic, to the area. And there was a mention of considering light rail transit on the corridor from Miami Springs. We held a project advisory team meeting, a public workshop, and a city council meeting with Miami Springs. And some of those highlighted topics are mentioned here on this slide, and they relate to things that I've just mentioned about the recommendations of the study, integration with other studies, concern about the traffic, and looking at intersection improvements. Those are some other things that were mentioned. Next slide. We also held a second round of public meetings, and the main conclusions, again, we heard concern about an elevated section, a need for bicycle pedestrian facilities. Similar topics were mentioned, concerns about freight traffic increasing, and a preference for traffic operations or transportation system management and operation improvements, or TSM&O improvements. So again, we heard a lot of similar issues raised. There was also some issues about looking at the 25th Street Viaduct, looking at some other alternative movements on State Road 836 that was mentioned as why not looking at that area to expand east-west movements. And as we've explained to the stakeholders, some of these suggestions or ideas are rather outside of the scope of this study, but it's something that we can take into consideration in our coordination with the agencies. Next, please. So what we did is we came up with a numerous amount of strategies, both to address capacity for roadway, for automobiles, for freight, for bike and pedestrian, as well as looking at potential lane repurposing options, and then TSM&O, or Transportation Systems Management and Operation. So the capacity options that we looked at, particularly in the western segment, involve either widening the roadway or a grade separated solution or an elevated solution. We also talked about the potential for lane repurposing in the eastern segment, where the roadway already fluctuates between 4 and 2 lanes right now, and this could possibly be for a buffered bicycle lane, a transit lane, or for parking. And then the TSM&O options, which stretch across the entire corridor, would be using the right-of-way more effectively, doing signal improvements, some intersection improvements, some minor bicycle pedestrian improvements, and using technology to better improve the transportation conditions along the corridor. Next, please. So this shows the numerous amounts of strategies that we showed at our second round of public workshops, and I believe we showed this to you all too at the CTAC. So we're not going to go through all of these tonight, but just showing the process of what we followed and what we presented. Next, please. And then in the eastern segment as well, again, we showed, I think, over 8 strategies in the eastern segment from 42nd to US 1, and then the previous slide in the west, we showed about 15 strategies. So from those strategies, we developed a preliminary matrix to see what strategies could possibly move forward for the purpose of our traffic modeling and following the rest of our engagement process as well. So if you click the next 3 buttons, we have a little animation there. So what's moving forward always throughout this study is a no-build option, or basically the do nothing option, the TSM&O option, the elevated option, again, to follow the process of this study, not necessarily to recommend it as a final solution, but to continue it through the study, and a lane repurposing option. Now you can click there. So we're going to discuss the alternatives, and I'll try to, I see I'm on slide 12, and I think I have about 30 slides, so I'll try to be a little quicker, and then at the end, if anyone asks, has questions, we can go back. But again, to summarize the alternatives, we have a no-build alternative, a TSM&O alternative. What we're calling a capacity build alternative is a 6+2 elevated section, and we're looking at that from 826 to Lejeune. And then a lane repurposing build alternative, again, for the eastern segment, basically from east of Lejeune to US 1. And then in the middle piece there, as mentioned, the DOT has a separate analysis of the iron triangle of State Road 112, Lejeune, and 36th Street, and how that intersection operates. And that would have to be integrated or looked at with any of these options. Next, please. So the no-build alternative, although it says no build, we don't want it to be a misnomer, because no build actually does have some build implications, and that being that there are certain intersection improvements already planned for the corridor. For example, at Northeast 36th Street and Northeast 2nd Avenue, there's actually an intersection improvement, which maybe you all are familiar with, of Miami-Dade County, to tighten up that intersection and actually remove a portion of the Northeast 2nd Avenue southbound to eastbound movement. So it would make it more pedestrian friendly. And you can see, I apologize, it's a little small there, but on the bottom right is a depiction of that. And that should be starting up very soon. And then there's concepts coming out of the I-195 study for intersection recommendations that would be included in a no build or do nothing alternative. And then projects that are already identified in the county's long-range transportation plan, such as the Iron Triangle. Yes. So the alternatives are the no-build alternative. I forgot to mention the purpose and need of the study. The purpose and need, we look at mobility enhancements, economic enhancements, safety issues, and accommodating all modes of travel. So for a no-build alternative, we could see that obviously it would be less costly than doing any build alternatives. It would be supported by Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs and less disruptive. The cons are that it does not address the full component of the study's purpose and need or future traffic conditions, which are showing to be failing in the West and in many portions in the East. And it wouldn't improve bicycle pedestrian conditions, as well as the numerous amounts of high crash locations along the corridor, which are particularly located between Lejeune and US 1. Next, we're going to describe the capacity build alternative. And this is, again, what we're calling the 6+2 elevated section. And this is a rendering whether a potential elevated section is in the median or the south side could be further explored. But this is what we're analyzing throughout this study process and modeling in terms of the traffic and looking at on a micro level how the intersections would be functioning. So this concept is in our study process looking at from 826 to Lejeune, an elevated, six lanes on 36th Street with 2 lanes elevated. And I also should mention, well, I think the next slides will cover some of the points. This is just some conceptual renderings of how this could potentially look like and how it could tie into the Palmetto Expressway, as well as how it would look along the Miami Springs and Virginia Gardens section. Obviously, if the section could have right-of-way impacts on the north side, unless the study team can tighten up and look at the concepts and refine the concepts. They could potentially fit within the right-of-way, or there could possibly be right-of-way impacts. And these are very, very initial conceptual renderings. So that's something that the study team is refining as we speak. The pros and cons of this alternative: there have been previous studies and plans that have recommended it, both by the TPO in terms of the superarterial study and grade separation study. Miami-Dade Road, 72nd Avenue and 36th Street is a high crash location, and having an elevated component could help potentially mitigate that high crash situation. Also, 36th Street is an evacuation route, so an elevated section could facilitate that, as well as it's on the National Highway Freight Network. And so there is a lot of freight activity on the corridor, especially with the intermodal logistics facility in the FEC Railway Hialeah Yard right adjacent to Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs. That facility is rather recent in construction, and there are a lot of movements coming in and out of that. So there is a need also to address freight movement. And then there is potentially opportunity underneath any sort of elevated section to make a better and wider space for bicycle pedestrian facilities. The cons, as you can imagine, costly. It is not favored by Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs. We've heard very negative feedback on this, and they've been vocal to us. And we met with them Friday, and they continue to provide us with this type of input that they do not want any sort of elevated section. And then there's concern about visual aesthetics, constructability, noise, pollution, and those are some of the issues they raised. For the east, what we're showing you here again is the potential for lane repurposing. Keep in mind that FDOT has a formal lane repurposing process whereby this would have to go through a formal study process and be approved by the Department of Transportation in Tallahassee. So we're showing concepts, but again, this would have to go through a formal study process. So the lane repurposing, again, from east of Lejeune to US 1, could potentially use in the 4-lane sections of 36th Street, that extra lane for transit, bicycle, or on-street parking. FDOT upper management, we're not sure yet about the on-street parking situation, but that's something, again, that would be further refined to see how this can meet the purpose and need of the study. And the reason why we're looking at this alternative is because, as we see it, the traffic volumes are comparable in the 4 and the 2-lane section. From today's standpoint, in the future, traffic congestion is expected to get worse. So we're not sure yet if this will be a viable option for future traffic conditions, but that's why it would need to go through that lane repurposing study. And then we'll go through these quickly, but this is just a preliminary sketch of how it could look along a snapshot of the corridor for 25th to 23rd Avenue. So this is a transit lane, a bike lane. Then we can skip to the next slide. And then the pros and cons of this alternative. The pros are it would help with economic development. You can see the graphics here of Alapata and Wynwood, and this area is experiencing redevelopment, gentrification, and it appears like this kind of alternative would be supportive of the visions of these areas, as well as supportive of some of the local plans connecting to transit as well. The cons are, as anyone can imagine, if you're taking away or using a lane of traffic for a bicycle parking or transit, it could obviously negatively affect traffic. So the traffic congestion could get worse, and that's a trade-off or a sacrifice that everyone would have to agree to if that's what the analysis shows. And then there would be cost and construction. Next, please. And then finally, the transportation systems management and operation alternative, which could be applied to the whole 8.6 mile long corridor. Next, please. We've looked at preliminary strategies or improvements along the corridor from west to east on some of the recommendations that could move forward on a minor scale. Some of these are turn lane improvements, optimizing signal timing, converting some northbound approaches to left turn lanes. And so we have a whole kind of laundry list of strategies here that can be applied. These are more minor in nature and they're less costly as well. Next. And this is just a graphic depicting from 826 to Lejeune. There are some issues here with the high crashes, and people probably driving this corridor, you're familiar with trying to turn left and trying to use the medians to get into the businesses, and it can become quite a mess there. So there's a potential to look at potential median closures or changing those full median openings to directionalized median openings. And this would help the corridor come more in line with FDOT's access management standards, where there are certain spacings recommended for driveways and medians, which right now it's pretty much non-compliant. Next, please. We'll just kind of breeze through these. Again, these are just showing some turn lane improvements at 72nd Avenue and what that could look like and for TSMNO. And then the next one is showing curb extensions, and this would, as the name indicates, extend the curb so that the pedestrian could have a shorter distance to cross. And in the eastern segment, again from Lejeune to US1, there's a high amount of bike ped crashes. So this may be one potential mitigation strategy. And in red, we've circled the locations where that would fit. Next, please. And then similarly, where right turn lanes could be added to the intersections, particularly in the east, we looked at that and what size of turn lane could be fit there. So of the TSMNO, previous studies have recommended it. It's a low-cost solution. It's favored by Virginia Gardens and Miami Springs. It can still meet some aspects of the purpose and need. However, it does not fully address the purpose and need. And so we've mapped out all these TSMNO improvements here, and this is just to depict the opportunities, and I would call it opportunities along the corridor, because for short-term improvements, these opportunities could be matched up with FDOT's work program, as well as similar local county efforts, local city or county efforts, whereby some of these improvements could be funded or tied to implementing on local projects. Next, please. So the next steps. So what are we going to do? We're going to continue looking at the alternatives of the no build, the to build alternatives, the capacity elevated 6+2, the lane repurposing, and the TSMNO. We're analyzing our traffic outputs from those alternatives and seeing how those alternatives compare with travel time, speed, delay, safety. And then we're going to rank those or look at an alternatives matrix to see how they compare in meeting the study's purpose and need. we've gotten a lot of feedback from the public. We're continuing to get feedback from the public on all these recommendations, and we're documenting that through our study process. Next, please. And so our next workshop for the public will be held in January. I believe it's the 20th and the 25th. We're going to hold 2 locations, one for the West to attract more people who live in the Western segment, and then one in the Eastern segment of the corridor, since the corridor is about 9 miles long. And then finally, the study will be wrapped up in April, and then it will be decided with FDOT how the study progresses beyond this, whether it's wrapped into the next phase of the project development and environment phase. So I know I talked a lot and probably gave you a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions or hear your feedback today.
All right, thank you so much, Daphne. At this point in time, I think Chair is here, so I'd like to recognize our Chair as Alexander Adams.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. I saw most of the presentation from my car, but then sorry about that. I can't see the people there, so I haven't done one of these virtually yet, Paul.
Okay.
So
no problem. Right now, if there are any
you want people
questions,
to raise their hand online, or how you want to do it?
if there are any questions, they can raise their hand right now. If they have any questions, if any members have any questions, they can raise their hand. At this point in time, if there's no questions, then we'll move on to the next presentation. And we'll thank Daphne. Right now, I'm not seeing any. I see, okay.
I guess I'll
I saw your hand, Chair.
Yeah, I guess I'll ask a few things if there's nobody else. I was going to give everyone the opportunity. One question I have is, you mentioned that there's a raised alternative, but it only shows the 6 existing lanes and adding 2 raised. And I can see where the neighborhoods and all would not want that. And you're talking about there may not be enough right of way for improvements to pedestrian and bikes and all. Why, or could there be an alternative that is 4+4? In other words, they actually get smaller down below by putting more capacity up above, so that therefore they're getting a benefit at the ground for having capacity above. Is that possible, or has it been thought about?
Yeah, I definitely think that's possible. Something we need to do is right now we're kind of looking at the drawing table with our traffic modelers to look at how this alternative is performing, and tweaks to the alternative, like you said, to perhaps make it a 4+4 to try to fit some of those improvements within the right of way. And whether or not the improvements fit within the right of way or not, DOT still would always be including bicycle pedestrian facilities in any of the recommendations. So I hope I didn't inadvertently imply that those would not be included. But I definitely think that a 4+4 is an option that we could look at, and it could provide more opportunities at the ground level.
And the second part I was going to ask is, you mentioned is one of your alternatives is a lane repurposing, but then you would have to do another study from Tallahassee, or another study that would be approved by Tallahassee. And I think this is where people get frustrated, is like, you're currently doing a study. Like, why is that? If that's an alternative, why is that not part of the study? It's kind of like if every city is against a raised portion, even though you haven't shown like a 4+4, I think they'd be a little bit better. But if everybody's against it, then why is it even moving forward? Because it kind of feels like you just have a predefined set path. You know, if you're not completing the redesign, or you're not listening to this side, it kind of feels like it's pinched in the middle there.
Yeah, I understand. And we want to explain that well to everybody, the stakeholders, the agencies, and the public, because it could lead to a misunderstanding. But why? Okay, well, first, let me break up your question into two. So the lane repurposing study, the original project does have a defined scope, and DOT has a contractual budget for the scope of this study. So the lane repurposing study was not a component of that defined scope. As we got into the study, we saw that it's a possibility that this could be further looked at, but it was not scoped for in the original study, if that makes sense. And then in terms of why go through the elevated component if there's the negative public reaction. So the study, we like, the state does a very good job of having a well-defined process document. So what we do is we come up with these strategies, we analyze them, we get the public feedback, we do the engineering analysis, and we document the findings throughout the study, but we don't necessarily dismiss it because of one aspect or not at this phase. So a lot of previous studies, as mentioned, have recognized some sort of connection need between State Road 112 and 826. And so for us not to look at that, we felt that somebody could question further on or later on why the study did not look at it. So it's almost like a catch-22. If we look at it, we might be critiqued, but if we don't look at it, somebody later on could say, well, why wasn't that an option? And we could say, well, it started off as an option and went through the process, and here was the result of that story. So it's important for us to document it. And something to keep in mind too is that this area, while we're not favoring one alternative or another, we're following the process. The area of Miami Springs and Virginia Gardens is bounded, as mentioned, by that logistics facility. It's bounded by the airport, which kind of are two very large geographical barriers in a way. And both those facilities are generating a lot of freight traffic. So somehow that freight traffic needs to move. So there's an aspect of it of looking at that freight traffic that sort of get out of the way and get on that elevated component, which could also be open to general traffic as well. Or you're going to have to deal with it at the ground level, but it's not really going away. That freight traffic is not really going away. So those are some of the reasons why the elevated is still being looked at throughout the study process. And if the study moves into the project development and environment phase, the PD&E phase,
Okay.
The public involvement can further weigh in on, the viability of this option surviving, I guess. I don't know if I answered
Thank you.
the question.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more questions at this point in time, Daphne, going once, going twice. All right, so I'll go on. Thank you so much, Daphne. Appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. Chair, I don't know if you want to introduce the second item, next item.
Yes, second item, we have FDOT Strategic Intermodal System Policy Plan update. I'll turn it over to who's
Shireen, thank you. Yes. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me to present this presentation to you. My name is Shireen Yifang. I am the District 6 Strategic Intermodal Systems Coordinator, also known as the SIS Coordinator. Next slide. So thank you for updating the presentation, Lisa. The purpose of today's meeting is just describe the process of updating the SIS policy plan. This is very, very important because it affects funding for projects. And just to share an initial working list of some potential policy changes that central office is proposing, and to get input from you. or partners. There is a link to the SIS virtual room. I won't play it now because I know we only have a few minutes. We'll go straight to the next slide. So we'll skip introductions. I think we did that at the beginning, and I will talk today about the SIS policy plan update and the overview and the requirements for this and the process and the schedule for this update. And there will be some pauses for clarification, but I see per the rules of engagement, we'll wait until the end of the presentation to ask questions. Okay, so why am I here today telling you this? Because we are required to, by law, by Florida statute, it requires the FDOT to update the strategic intermodal system plan every 5 years and to take this plan out to the changes out to the public and to give the public and the local government and the regional planning councils an opportunity to comment on the update of the plan. Next slide. And I'll tell you how to comment on the plan later. So there are 5 elements required by statutes in the SIS plan, right? And they're covered in various documents and applications you see on the right. So there's the needs assessment, there's the prioritization process, there's a map of the SIS facilities, a finance plan based on a 10 and 20-year cost feasible component, and an assessment of impacts of proposed improvement to SIS corridors on military installations. Next slide, please. Right, so the SIS policy plan, how is this developed? It's developed by reviewing the most recent Florida Transportation Plan's goals and objectives to ensure that the policy plan aligns with the FTP goals and objectives. So right now, the comment period is open. So we're accepting public comments. And we will this will be accompanied in the draft plan. The comments will be incorporated. And the central office is gearing to adopt the final plan in first quarter of next year. And again, I'll tell you how to submit comments at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So these are just some of the state and regional and local plans we reviewed. When I say we us, District 6 and central office, as part of this update. Next slide. Okay, so building on the FTP, as well as many of the regional plans we just saw, the SIS policy plan has 5 focus areas, as you see on the right-hand side: safety, resilience, technology and innovation, and urban mobility and connectivity, and rural mobility and connectivity. To the left, those are the 7 goals of the Florida Transportation Plan. Next. And this is the schedule. Central office started working on the SIS policy plan update in early 2021, and again, targeting a completion by early 2022. Right, so right now, we, meaning both central office and the district staff, we're reaching out to you, our partners, to get input on potential strategies in the 5 focus areas. We do have some initial ideas we will share with you today, but no, we're still very early in the process. Next slide. And this is just some example of some other statewide partners we were coordinating with in central office and the districts. Next slide. Okay, so the update of this SIS policy plan, we will look at accomplishing the following. It will define objectives for how we plan to manage the SIS consistent with the broader goals of the FTP. It would outline focus areas for the SIS that are to be addressed in the next 5 years. It will set forth new policies or strategies directed towards these objectives and focus areas. And lastly, it will set forth the implementation guidance and how to carry the plan moving forward. Next slide. So this is from the 2016 or the existing SIS policy plan, and it focuses on the 3 areas which are generally in line with the Florida Transportation Plan. It's really for interregional connectivity, intermodal connectivity, and economic development. Next slide. So this is some of the SIS policy questions we'll be asking you, our partners. They're divided into 3 groupings: the designation policies, the needs and prioritization policies, and planning and collaboration policies. For example, under the designation policies, and this is key, we'll be asking, What types of facilities should be part of the SIS? And I know that's very, very important in Miami-Dade County. Next slide. Here's an example of what we call the designation criteria. If you look at the highway corridor designation, it must be on the interstate, it must be a high capacity or tool facility. For say an urban fixed guideway transit corridor, it must be currently connecting to multiple urbanized areas or counties and serving as a significant regional facility. Next slide. So this is an issue in defining interregional. So the statutory guidance, SIS is intended to be composed of facilities and services of statewide and interregional significance. However, there is no specific definition of regional or interregional in the statute. This designation was initially tied to the Enterprise Florida Economic Regions, which is no longer actively maintained. So as part of the 2022 SIS Policy Plan update, we are considering how to clarify or what is meant by interregional. Next slide. Right, another key policy with every periodic update is determining eligible uses of statewide managed SIS funds. A lot of people don't realize that even though your facility may be designated as a SIS facility, it doesn't, all types of uses don't qualify for SIS, like maintenance. It doesn't qualify for SIS funding. And this is just a few examples of the types of funding eligibility are for different facility types. Mostly they're geared towards capacity projects, capacity improvement. Next slide. And here's another issue we've been having, defining capacity. Right, this per the statutes is the SIS funds for highway capacity improvements. So, but we are examining how to provide additional flexibility within the statutory requirements to redefine capacity in a way that supports some of the outcomes of the Florida Transportation Plan, such as including supporting emerging mobility solutions and expanding the flexibility to increase emphasis on reliability and resilience. Next slide. Right, and as I mentioned, there are going to be 5 focus areas in the SIS Policy Plan update. The first one being urban mobility and connectivity. And the key issue here is the impact of congestion, particularly in the largest urban area, on the efficiency and reliability of the SIS. And we know this very well in Miami-Dade County. Next slide. So some potential policy changes under this focus area of urban mobility and connectivity, and I'm not going to read all of this. This is way too much, but really to reassess the definition of interregional and more to focus on people and freight movement by better identifying which facilities carry significant interregional flows. Under the needs, looking at providing, one example is looking at providing the flexibility for emerging mobility solutions. And the last one on the needs is very, very new. And I would say I've never seen the SIS do this before, but looking at providing the flexibility for use of SIS funds on off-SIS facilities to improve performance of the SIS. So that's really good news for us in Miami-Dade County. And I'll skip over this slide. We'll wait till the end unless someone has a burning question to ask. So this is another focus area, resilience. The core issue here really is reducing the vulnerability of the SIS infrastructure to risks such as extreme weather and sea level rise. Next slide. Some potential policy changes, and again, I'm not going to read all of this, but under the needs and prioritization policies, I'd like to point out to expand the SIS funding eligibility for adaptation or retrofit of existing infrastructure. That's completely new. SIS was really for capacity improvements in the past. Sorry about that. Next slide, please. Under technology and innovation, the central office looked at several trends associated with automated, connected, and electric and shared vehicles. And the trends are currently showing it's very low right now. As of July 2020, it's like less than 1%. However, they're looking at about 10 to 35% by 2040 of this type of technology and innovation. Next slide. And some potential policy changes, which is really exciting under the needs and prioritization policies to expand the SIS funding eligibility to accommodate technology infrastructure such as EV charging stations and smart signals and locational reference markers. Next slide. I will skip over this till the end. Safety is another focus area for the SIS. Right now, the SIS carries more than 1/3 of all vehicle miles traveled on the state highway system. In the past 5 years, the number of fatalities on the SIS steadily increased from 715 in 2015 to 813 in 2019. This is very bad. We need to get to zero. So some potential policy changes with regards to safety would be increasing the flexibility for including safety features in SIS capacity projects instead of just relying on safety funds. Next slide. Under rural mobility and connectivity, I won't go into this too much detail because this mostly applies to Monroe County. But just note that in the rest of the state, a significant portion of the SIS highway system are in rural areas. Next slide. And I won't go into the rural connectivity potential policy changes unless anyone wants to look at any one of these. It doesn't really apply to us too much. And some of the implication for Southeast Florida, I won't read all of these notes, but I would look at bullets 2 and 3, which is completely new, to look at expanding the ability to leverage SIS and other funding sources to alternative projects to traditional highway capacity expansion. And also, as I mentioned before, to expand the ability to use SIS funds and non-SIS facilities. That is really, really new for us. Next slide. What's next? To complete the SIS policy plan in early 2022. And after that, we'll start updating the designation criteria, the funding eligibility guidance, and the long-range plans. We'll continue to collaborate with you, the MPOs, the RPCs, and other partners to demonstrate our new approaches. Next slide. Okay, and here's how you can provide comments on the policy plan update. There is an email set up, sisinfo@dot.state.fl.us. There is also a SIS virtual room where you can go in and you'll see all the focus areas and you can submit comments. The email address for that, the link would be sisvirtualroom.floриdatransportationplan.com. Okay, and that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully that wasn't too fast, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Let me get some water. Hold on.
All right, thank you. Paul, can you, I think it's easy on these virtual, it's easier for you to kind of
Sorry.
Not a problem.
and be able to.
Not a problem. Does anybody have any questions at this time? I'm looking at the attendees, I'm looking at the panelists, I'm looking at the committee members. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand at this time. If you have any questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Going once, going twice. Chair, I'll go back to you.
Okay. The only question I would have is, number one, looking at rural areas, I think it was pretty clear when a lot of people throughout Florida came out against the MCORs and kind of expanding, sprawl throughout the state. And I think that really goes towards your projections of vehicle miles traveled. People really want to live more in condensed urbanized areas. And so I'm really worried about SIS being used to kind of expand out into these rural areas beyond our UDB, or more so in the other parts of the state. And I do think it should be able to be used on rail corridors and all, especially down here. Because, for instance, you have Metro Rail along US 1. None of the cities along US 1 want US 1 to be expanded. I mean, that's been policy for years and years and years, all the way back to, that's why I-95 was not, brought through. It was originally proposed to go all the way to Homestead, and cities all along US 1 said no, 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 no. And thank God they did. But I think we have to get past capacity. We have to get past volume and start looking at urban geographic areas and providing more connectivity within those urban areas, whether it's Metro Rail, Metro Mover, and those sorts of things, Tri-Rail. And now other parts of the state are starting those types of things like Sun Rail, possibility in Jacksonville, Tampa. I think that's the future. It's not vehicle miles traveled, and it's not expanding interstates. So, or expanding rural roads. I don't think that's where Florida wants to go, my personal thought.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Chair. And we have been conveying that message to central office that we just can't keep adding capacity. We just can't. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about double deckers now, and I mean, it's already comical, but were we going to talk about triple deckers and
tunnels and
that's
yeah.
So anyways,
yes,
thank you for the presentation.
No problem.
Thank you for coming to see us and updating us. And I think I would say to all the members, it's everyone's job to kind of let your districts that you represent, let the organizations that you're on and all know about these things that are going on, and know about the websites where they can become involved, because it's not just us on this call. It's the bigger picture and who we represent, letting them know, how to get involved, which helps you out with your outreach. So.
Yes, we've already reached out to the TPO, the Miami-Dade TPO, and these are the subcommittees. I think the last one I have is the freight.
Right.
But,
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank everyone. Thank you.
And get some water.
Oh, yes. Thank you. It's been a long day. All right. Bye.
All right. Is that the only presentations?
That's it, Chair. That's it.
Okay.
We've come to a conclusion.
Okay.
So,
So for the next meeting, one question that I know we were mulling over is whether to have a December meeting. Do we know yet whether the TPO that we advised to, are they going to have a December meeting, or have they decided yet?
as far as I know, they will be having a December meeting, as far as I know. If anything changes, I'll definitely let you know, and we'll let the committee members know as well.
Okay, so I'll leave it open to anyone to make some comments, but it seems to me at this time, I would kind of leave it open. We can always decide between now and then, but based on what the TPO does.
Yeah, I think Alan has his hand up, but we need to keep it what's on the agenda. This is just a workshop.
Yeah.
Alan,
am I recognized?
Yes.
So if there is nothing pressing, historically we did not meet in December I don't know, maybe once in the last 20 years. So if there's nothing that we have to pass on, I'd rather be more assertive, Alexander, and say that we won't have a meeting unless we have to, because we have to pass on something that the TPO, I don't think it's relevant that the TPO is having a meeting unless they need us to pass on something, make a suggestion on it or listen to it. So I'd rather be a little more assertive and say, unless the TPO needs us to meet because they're going to vote on something, I would make the recommendation that we don't have a December meeting.
But we don't have to make a decision right now. Like I said, we have to wait until you know, the agenda comes out for the TPO board and see what they have coming up, and then we'll be able to, you know, let the chair know, and then we can go from there.
But we have
And does
nothing right
anyone
now
else have-
scheduled.
As of
pending?
right now, we don't have anything scheduled right now.
Okay, good.
Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Will it be in person or virtual?
I mean, that'll be decided by the chair.
Yeah, I
at,
think it could
later-
be either way,
later
actually.
time.
Okay.
All right, Chair, I think that's it.
Is that all? So
Yeah,
do I need to ask for a,
no.
wait, we have new business? Any new
No,
business?
they just need to press the red button.
What's that?
Just got to press the red button.
Oh,
The meeting has.
any new
concluded.
business by the committee? Anything they need to let
Oh,
people
Chair,
know?
yeah, there's no new business. It's just
Okay.
once the presentations are over, since this is a virtual workshop, that's it.
Oh, I got you. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Look
All
at the
right.
Any
smile. on
comments
Paul's
by
face.
the
He's got an
committee?
early evening tonight.
All
Okay,
right. So we
sounds good
conclude.
then.
That's
If
it.
anybody
Thank
has
you all so
comments,
much.
then we'll-
Thank y'all. Have a good
leave
night.